Hey, folks, we're back with another episode of Full Scale Rebellion. This is our second volume. So, the first one we went through Skeleton Crew, and we kind of used this segment as a way to better, just dive in depth into some different TV, movie projects, just things in the entertainment space, things that we like to talk about, things that we talk about already on the channel, but just an opportunity to really give you all a little bit more of the nitty gritty of these projects and the people behind them. And so today we're gonna give that to you again, and we're gonna talk a little bit about specifically I don't know if you want to call it the Taylor Sheridan universe, but for those of you who may not know that he's the creator of shows like Yellowstone, 1883, 1923, things like that. Sort of the modern Western, I guess you'd say. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that, and also just break down kind of him as a actor, as a director, as a producer, as a writer, and then also I'm going to give you my thoughts on his newest show that he's producing called Landman, that's on Paramount Plus, and also give you my thoughts on Yellowstone, the first season, because I actually just started watching the show in the last couple of weeks. So, but yeah, we're going to jump right into that in just a minute. But before we do, please, if you enjoy what we do and you really want to support us, the best thing you can do is give us a like, subscribe to the channel, comment, share, and just engage with us as much as possible, because that's really, I mean, like we've said before, we do this in our free time. And, the only way we're able to do more of this is if we have that support. So, thank you all for watching, and we're just going to jump right into it. So we're talking about Taylor Sheridan today. He's got an interesting story, because he started out obviously as an actor, doing some digging kind of on his past. He showed up. I think his first credit was in an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger, actually in 1995. So he's definitely been in it for a while. And he's kind of shifted around from an actor to more of a producer / director role, and even a writer. So I am going to get to my reviews of Landman and Yellowstone, but I wanted to kind of just give some background on him as a creator in that space, and kind of give y'all some of that information that maybe you weren't aware of already, or maybe just it helps you to see kind of where. It's one thing to go and watch a show or a movie. It's another thing to know, sort of the behind the scenes aspect of it, and what goes into the project, and the people involved. Because I've found a lot of times when I go to watch movies, I'm more inclined to watch a movie where there's a director's name or a producer's name on it that I've really enjoyed their content in the past. I'm more willing to go see a movie that I may not know anything about, because I like that director or that producer, or so on and so forth. So, and I'm more likely to avoid movies that have writers or directors or producers that I don't like. So, I think it's just a good way for us to highlight those people in the entertainment space that are doing a good job right now, and just point you to maybe some really interesting projects, really cool and well-made projects that those people are working on. So, Taylor Sheridan, he's so like I said, he made his first appearance in the show Walker, Texas Ranger in 1995, just one episode, and I think he just played an extra character. I'm not 100% sure. I've not seen the episode myself. I've seen episodes of the show, but not that one. But yeah, he kind of went from actor in some showing up in TV shows here and there, single episodes, maybe a handful of episodes, to I think really coming full-fledged onto the scene in a more mainstream fashion with Yellowstone, and that was kind of his big hit as a director / producer / writer. He did a little bit of all of that, and he also stars in some of the episodes as well. So, but the reason I actually got connected with him, I knew about Yellowstone. I never watched it until the last couple of weeks, but I think I was first introduced when I watched the show 1883, which was a a prequel to Yellowstone, where the Dutton family, it talks about some of their, or it gives you the story of some of their earlier relatives as they are settling in the West in Montana, where you see them in the modern day show. So that was my first introduction to them, and then to him, and then I went and watched 1883, or sorry, 1923, and then eventually I watched. I believe it was Lawman Bass Reeves, which was definitely more of a true Western film, or a Western show, I should say. And I really enjoyed all three of them. And so I've really just been anything that's come out with his name on it. I've been very curious to see. Um, and his I guess his hallmark, his sort of calling card for the type of shows he likes to do is obviously he's in that Western genre, and he's done some that are more traditionally Western, taking place in like the 1800s, early 1900s, and then he has what we would call the modern Western, um, with Yellowstone and with Landman and things like that. Um, but his calling card is really this sort of grounded, realistic approach to his filmmaking, and I think that's something for me. Like, being a big fan of um, creatives like Christopher Nolan, George Lucas, guys that really focused on practical effects. It's That's the type of stuff I gravitate to naturally, and so it's been really cool to see just the consistency in that with his shows, and even doing some digging on some of his earlier career, some of the shows and movies that he was involved with that I didn't even realize he was involved with. And so he's really starting to build himself up as maybe the most popular right now, um, producer in television. I mean, if you think of all the projects, you look at all the projects he's done in the last, I don't know, 6 years since he started Yellowstone. I mean, I was looking through all of them earlier on IMDb, and I don't think he had a single one that was under an 8 in terms of the scoring system that they have on there. So, I mean, as a creative in the entertainment space, I mean, that's impressive to have that much of a track record that is successful and consistent, I would say. And we're going to get into some of the areas I think maybe he can work on as a producer slash director slash writer, because he does a little bit of everything. Um, but I kind of wanted to look at some of these other projects that he worked on before he got to Yellowstone that are actually pretty quality um, products. And so we're gonna take a quick look at those before we jump into the review section of this. All right, so just looking here on his IMDb page, scrolling through some of his projects, you see pretty quickly some titles that start to pop up that really jump out to you, because they're ones that I think in the mainstream were pretty popular when they came out. I immediately think of Sicario, which is it's actually a Denis Villeneuve directed movie, but it was written by Taylor Sheridan, or he was one of the writers on the show or on the movie, and he also and for those of you who may not know, Denis Villeneuve is the guy behind the Dune movies, the most recent ones, Dune Part 1 and Part 2. He's the guy behind Blade Runner 2049. Prisoners is another one of his that he's done that I thought was a pretty quality film. Um, and there are other ones that I may not have gotten to. I know Arrival, he also directed Arrival. Um, but so, I mean, it's interesting that you get that kind of director writer team up with Sicario, which is, it's a movie that really delves into the Mexican cartels and sort of these border agents that are trying to stop the flooding of drugs and different things into the United States. It's a dark and gritty movie, but it's a very interesting one, and it's well made and well written. And so I think that's credit to him, as credit to Sheridan as a writer. And then he also was a writer on Hell or High Water, which it wasn't one of my favorite films personally, but I can't argue that it is well made, and I think that's like I said, that it's just that consistency that you see in the things that he tends to be attached to, at least in the last 10 years or so. And so, I mean, I think that's a. I mean, you look at these titles and you go, "Wow!" I mean, it's really an impressive resume, and I think that's the one thing I'm trying to get at. And then Wind River, I can't remember if it was a Netflix or if it was an exclusive streaming title, but he was actually a writer and I believe a director as well on Wind River, which was a yeah. So he is credited with with a director credit on that one, and that's interesting because Wind River, it has the vibes of a Yellowstone um, because of the setting. It's about a guy. Well, I believe it's an FBI agent, and there's this local man that lives out in somewhere, I think in the neighborhood of Montana or in that region, and they're investigating a murder that took place. I think it was on a reservation, um, and so it's about it starring Jeremy Renner and Elizabeth Olsen. You may know both of them from the MCU, Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch, but it's a pretty interesting movie. It is more. It's that same tone of a dark and gritty um, thriller, sort of crime drama. And so, you look at those, you see those connections. Obviously, Yellowstone. Um, he Mayor of Kingstown. I didn't realize he was a director and a writer on that as well. And Lioness is another relatively recent one. He's also been credited um, with directing with that. 1883, director of one episode. Um, in terms of writing, um, he's also the creator of the show. This one, I haven't even gotten to this one yet, but Tulsa King is also another one of his, which I enjoyed the first season. I've not. I mean, it's not the perfect show, obviously, but it was pretty entertaining and had some good moments in it. Um, and I would say it's probably worth a watch. If you're looking for something that's more of like a almost like a gangster western style show, that's kind of what you get. Sylvester Stallone does a great job as the protagonist in that, and I don't know, the first season's kind of a fun little excursion, and but yeah, so he those writing credits go all the way back to Sicario in 2015. And you kind of just get a look at all the different things that he's worked on. Um, and I'm not going to jump too much into that. The point that I'm trying to make is just seeing the quality of things that he's been associated with, the consistency there. Um, and I mean, you look at all of these and you see, starting with Yellowstone, you've got an 8.7, 8.7 in 1883, 8.3 with 1923, 8.2 Mayor of Kingstown, 8 with Tulsa King, 8.3 with Landman, Linus at 7.7. I mean, it's just one of those things where you just rarely see him involved with things that have a poor rating, and I think that's why when I say I think he may be the best producer director combo in Hollywood today in TV. I mean, that could very well be the case, and so and I'm just looking back on this. I thought he was involved with lawman Bass Reeves, but um, I don't see a credit for that on here. Let me jump into his producer here. Yeah, okay. So he was an executive producer on Lawman Bass Reeves, and I'm a little surprised that it's at a 7.4. I actually really enjoyed that show. It's kind of like a one-off story of a cowboy slash obviously lawman that is trying to essentially just provide for his family, it's kind of it's got a very interesting story, and the main character goes on a really sort of fun but dark journey. And I don't know, I found myself very, very engrossed in that show. Um, but yeah, um, just getting back to um, sort of the meat of what I wanted to get to with some of his stuff. I would say, like I said, the realism, the quality of the visuals. Like so, whenever you're on location, you're not heavily putting heavy CGI um, into your shows, your movies, whatever it is. Um, I gravitate more to that because I love the realism of a film, and I love to feel like, hey, even though this might be like a sci-fi movie or a fantasy movie, it's like when it's realistic looking, you have that idea in your mind that that could be real. Like there's, it makes it feel less and less fictional, I guess is the best way to put it. And so that's why a show like Andor, that was mostly completely shot on location, it looks phenomenal. I think you just get a different element of like the visual medium, and I think sometimes with the actors they can connect um, and really hone in their performance when they can be stuck in a location where it's real. They can feel it physically, and they get in that sort of um, atmosphere of being on location on a live set. And I think that's what he goes for, is that ultra realistic, that whether it's that with the visuals, whether it's the locations, the dialogue, um, the sets, like the equipment and stuff they use, everything just looks realistic. One of the things I noticed with 1883, and it's like it's these random things that you notice that are just kind of odd. It's like, you know all the characters are filthy, like their clothes are filthy, and they're that seems like um, kind of a dumb thing to point out, but I mean, it's things like that. The fact that the women, had armpit hair, which is a goofy thing to bring up, but at the same time, it's like you see a lot of shows that are set, in the West in the 1800s, or in back into the medieval ages, and the women are come clean shaven and all these things, and it's like, not that that ruins anything, but the fact that he's willing to go into that much detail to where like that's realistic to how things were back then, to where when you're traveling on this Oregon Trail or whatever it was they were going to settle in the West on all these wagons, it's like you are filthy, you aren't shaving like that all the time, the men's beards are massive, and so, I mean, there's just this element to all of his stuff that he focuses on the details, and he makes it feel very real, and feel like you're just dropped right into it, and you're immersed in that world. Um, I would say some of the things that maybe he is weaker at. I think watching and I'll get into this a little bit more with my Yellowstone review here in a second, but I think I think at times um, some of the scenes, the way they're shot, the dialogue can be a little bit. You can feel a little bit unnatural. It's not very organic. There's some scenes that just feel kind of they're just there and they don't really serve a purpose to advance the plot. It's like it's just kind of like wasted space almost. And that can be a minor critique. I think it shows up more in other shows. You see in some shows than others. Um, but I would say that's something that as he continues to improve and really, a movie director that's at the top of his craft would say, when you're given that amount of money to create a movie or a TV show or whatever, you have to be efficient with what you have. And so something I think he could do, I guess the best way to put it is he could be more efficient with the way he directs some of his stuff, because I think there's some scenes that like you could leave out entirely and it would not affect the episode at all. And so I think it's just maybe giving more meaning to some of his scenes, or maybe just cutting some out altogether. Um, but um, but yeah, let's just that being said, kind of given an idea of him, who he is as a creative, let's jump right into his most recent show on Paramount Plus called Landman. I'm going to give my thoughts on it, and then I'm also going to give um, my thoughts on what I'm thinking about so far through the first season of Yellowstone, and then I'm going to give my content reviews for those at the end. So, yeah, Landman. Just to give a little bit of the setting, it is more of it's a modern, I guess you could say Western. It's not strictly a Western. It's not in the vein of Yellowstone, where they're at literally cowboys and they're dealing with this out sort of in more of a rugged area of the country. But this deals with a guy who is a what they would call over there a landman, and essentially he is a supervisor of this oil company, and his job is to manage all of these men that are and all this equipment and all these things where they're drilling this oil in Texas, and it basically gives you an ultra what feels like an ultra realistic. I'll be honest, I don't know that much about the oil industry in terms of how they harvest it, so I can't tell you how realistic it actually is. But I would just say the show makes you feel like you're getting an honest look at what it's like to like work an oil rig and be the manager of all of this stuff and have to deal with sort of the all the things surrounding that. But the main character is played by Billy Bob Thornton. He's very believable as a landman, a guy who's having to juggle all of these things. And so the show's kind of, and I think they're through 5 episodes now, and I think there's probably 8 or 10 that are coming. Um, but I think through the first 5 episodes, he's having to deal with these lawsuits that are coming up because it's well known that these whether they're cartel members or gang members, whatever they are, they'll steal trucks, they'll steal planes, they'll ship their drugs around on them, and then they'll bring them back. It's like it's just part of it. He's like if he had to spend every day recovering lost equipment, they would never get anything done. So it's just one of those things that's like an acceptable loss. Um, and so basically, through a series of events, a plane that was stolen is essentially these criminals landed on one of the roads that is a private road only for the oil people. And there's a tanker that comes through and destroys the plane, and it sets in chain of motion this whole lawsuit about why wasn't the plane reported? Why is this truck that's not supposed to be out here? And so that's kind of a minor thing that kind of puts some of the events of it together. But really, it's about this main character played named Tommy, played by Billy Bob Thornton, and it's about him navigating sort of not just the job, but also kind of the ramifications of and the consequences of what the job has cost him and his family over the years. Because at this point, he's obviously in his, I don't know, 60s, 70s in the film or in the show. And, but he is trying to juggle, his teenage daughter who's, finishing up, I believe, college or maybe she's in college or she's about to finish up high school. I can't remember exactly, but she's come back to stay with him for a little bit. He's got a couple of coworkers that are staying in his house, and so there's some awkwardness there and some kind of goofy scenes that go on with that. Um, and then obviously his ex-wife is kind of oddly present in his life in kind of a flirtatious way, and so he has to deal with that as well. And then he's just juggling the parts of everyday life. And I think one of the side plots that's kind of the most interesting is the main character's son. His name's Cooper, played by an actor. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything before. He's a younger actor, but he's early 20s. But essentially, he's decided he wants to be in the oil business. He wants to be a landman like his dad, and so he has to start from the bottom, and he has to work what they call the patch, which is where the oil rigs are. And he's having to really be thrown to the wolves, basically. And so you sort of are dealing with Tommy's story, you're dealing with Cooper's story, you're dealing with just the general um, family dynamic that they have. But like I said, it looks amazing. It's well acted, well written. Um, really enjoying it so far, and you wouldn't think that it would be the most compelling storyline. I will say there are times where it doesn't feel like a whole lot is happening, but it's been engaging enough for me to stay with it. And honestly, I would say my biggest gripe, and this will be something that I'll talk about a little bit um, in the content review of this, but um, there's a lot of, and I understand modern entertainment. It's been going on for decades and decades. It's part of it, but the sexual content of a show, it's present in just about every show these days. But I feel like there are elements in this show where it just feels like it only exists to be sexual with no really propulsion of any kind to be, I guess, beneficial to the story. I mean, there's sequences where the daughter will just be like walking through the house in a bikini, and the coworkers of the guy of the main character are just like, freaking out, and because they're like, why I can't get, this is my office. I can't have, you walking through here like this and me being distracted. And the way they kind of do it is it's kind of like, it's a little over the top. It's a little bit ridiculous, really. And it doesn't feel realistic. And I think that's kind of where I'm at is it feels like it's kind of jarring when you um, see sort of the grounded nature of his shows in general. It just feels very forced and very jarring whenever they inject that in there because it's just a little excessive, I think, and it doesn't necessarily, like I said, it doesn't always serve the purpose for the plot, which I think is generally the um, what those scenes should be doing, if at all. And so, um, but yeah, I'm probably a solid 8 or so with the show right now out of 10. Um, enjoying it so far. Um, and I plan to continue watching it as it goes on. And with that being said, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the content section of this, and like I talked about on our first version of Full Scale Rebellion, um, this is just a section for those people who are concerned about the content that they're consuming in their TV shows, in their movies, and it's the opportunity for me to inform you as someone who's essentially approaching it like a critic, where I am watching stuff and giving my thoughts, obviously, and rating it on a scale of 1 to 10. Um, since I'm already doing that, and I am to some degree mindful of what I consume as well. I don't watch just anything. I do my homework before I watch it, um, but it's an opportunity for me to share and hopefully to inform those that are uncertain about whether to watch something, one, for content purposes, and two, whether is it worth watching or not. And so content wise, in the profanity department, this is definitely we're going to rate this one as a high in terms of the profanity level. So that means, pretty severe language, a lot of F words, a lot of S words, very frequent. I mean, there's not many conversations where you don't hear several. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest drawbacks as someone who's worried about that sort of thing and it's a pattern with all of Taylor Sheridan's shows, to be fair to him as a creator. It's how they are. And I mean, is it realistic? Probably. And so, but just beware going into this one. I would say it's a high to very high on terms of the profanity level. And in terms of the sex and nudity section, like I said before, there's not very much explicit nudity where there's like no clothing. There's a couple of scenes where there's a little bit, but it is not usually extremely explicit. It's mostly, the daughter and the ex-wife wear a lot of a lot of bikinis and a lot of sort of revealing outfits, and that's pretty frequent through the first 5 episodes, to be fair. But I would rate this probably it's going to be on the higher end, medium to high, I would say. Anytime to me there's any kind of like, unexposed nudity in, it's going to be in the high section. So I would say that that definitely rates in the high section as well. Um, and and so in terms of, would I recommend it? As in this, and when I say recommend, this is fully from a balance of, does does the negative content and the quality of the show, how does it balance out? And I would say from a quality standpoint, the show is very well made, um, very realistic, very well acted for the most part, other than some of the things I've said. And I would recommend it in that regard. Obviously, if you're someone who is concerned about some of that content, and you're really not wanting to be heavily exposed to higher concentrations of nudity, sex, and profanity, this is obviously not the show for you to watch. So, that being in mind, that's kind of my content review of it. Like I said, 8 out of 10 is what I would give it on a scale of just the quality of the show itself. Um, and that's kind of where I am on Landman. And I'm going to just kind of jump right over into the first season of Yellowstone. Um, and as I said before, I'm a little late to the game on this one. I came in watching 1883 was the first Taylor Sheridan show of that, in that sort of Dutton family saga, and so I've just recently gotten to Yellowstone. So I'm about five of the 9 episodes into season one. Um, and it was interesting looking at some of the ratings for the seasons, and you'll see if you go on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb and you look at the season breakdown and the ratings that they got. Specifically on Rotten Tomatoes, I think the first season of Yellowstone comes in critically at like a 58%, which isn't very good. I mean, that's considered, anything below 60 is considered rotten, and so um, that was interesting to me, because when you immediately jump to season two, it goes up to like an 89 or a 91, and then you go to season three and it's a 100%, and then you go to season four and it's like a 80 or 90%. And even the newest season that's just currently out, I think is at like 79, 80%. So it's interesting that before I even turned it on, I was like, wow, what is it that makes season one sort of that much worse than um, the others? And it was pretty apparent to me after the first couple of episodes what that is. Um, and I would say for season one, I would probably rate it around a 5 out of 10, because um, I think the characters and the setting and the story are very interesting, and they're probably the better part of the show early on. But I think the show suffers in season one from a lack of experience in the director's chair, and this was, I think, one of Taylor Sheridan's kind of first big forays. I know he was a director on Wind River, which I thought was a well directed um, movie, but this is one of those where the show kind of feels like just it doesn't quite know what to do with itself yet in season one. It's like it has a lot of interesting ideas, but it doesn't necessarily know how to execute them yet. And some of the dialogue, some of the acting just feels um, very contrived, or sort of over the top, maybe a little bit. And um, it's I don't know. It's almost like they're trying too hard in a lot of the scenes. They were trying to make it dramatic, and in the process, it makes it kind of unnatural. And so it feels very clunky at times. Like I said, there's a lot of scenes that it might be like a 5 minute scene. You get to the end of the scene and you're like, why was that in the episode? Like, what purpose did it serve? And I think there's a lot of that in the first season, where there's just a lot of wasted space in the episode, in the runtime. So um, I honestly think it's one of those things where, and Taylor Sheridan did direct the entire first season. I looked through the directing credits. He was the director of all of the first 9 episodes. And, you know, I think he's proven with some of his other projects, such as Wind River and even some of his later stuff that he's directed. He's directed some episodes of some of his later shows in that same universe. Um, he has the ability to direct and do it competently. It's not that he doesn't, but I think with Yellowstone, I don't know if it was the ambition of the project, how big it was when he was going into it. It just seems like um, he just hadn't quite found his footing yet in sort of the tone and direction of what he was wanting to do. I mean, characters do a lot of things that don't necessarily logically make a lot of sense. Um, I don't know. It just feels like almost like melodramatic sometimes in terms of the way they try to execute some of the scenes and stuff. But there's some very complex characters in there. Obviously, John Dutton, who's the patriarch of the family, he's a very complex character because he's not really a good guy in the truest sense. Like he's a very um, troubled and deeply ambitious and sort of territorial character where he'll do anything he has to protect his family, to protect their land. Um, but you see sort of this need for like control to control everything, and you see he's got a lot of connections, a lot of deep connections, and so essentially he runs the valley there in this section of Wyoming that they live in, or sorry, Montana that they live in, um, and uh, and so it's it makes for kind of an odd experience watching season one because there's a lot of good there. And obviously, as we see through these other seasons, the show obviously gets better. And I've had people tell me that, like, when you get past season one, the show really improves. And part of that may be because I don't think he directed very many episodes after season one. I think he may have directed like two or three other ones past season one. Um, but yeah, I would say, um, it's just a mixed bag. And I think that's kind of the best way to put it. And just a show that really hadn't quite found its footing, but it does enough to warrant like continuing that story. And as we see, it became a bit of a phenomenon as it grew and expanded. Um, and so I would say so far, like I said, about a 5 out of 10. I said, I mean, it's gorgeous. The show looks gorgeous. It's on location. Um, you know, everything just looks like you would expect from a Taylor Sheridan project. And like I said, it feels pretty realistic, other than some of these scenes with some of the dialogue and some of the things the characters do that just like I said, don't make a lot of sense. Um, but um, but in general, I think that's the reason that the execution of the thing, not so much the ideas behind it, but it's the execution that really suffers. I think in season one, um, and Um, yeah, in terms of the content review, this one is obviously, if you've watched any of his other stuff or you've listened to some of the things I've been saying throughout this video, the profanity is going to be on the high end, and that's just like when you get into a Taylor Sheridan project, that's just how his shows are. And so if you're averse to that sort of thing, like I said with Landman, like just be aware that's how the language is in this one as well. And in terms of the sex and nudity, um, there hasn't been a lot so far. There is a couple of scenes with Beth Dutton's character in the first few episodes that you do see a good bit of. I mean, there's one sequence in episode 3 where there's nothing left to the imagination, really. Um, and so this one definitely, I think, because of that, has to rate on the high end as well in terms of the severity of the content. But it is a little bit more spaced out. There's not as much of it as frequently as there is in like a Landman um, or really any of his other projects, because I think I'm looking back on like 1883 had very little, 1923 had very little. Um, this one's kind of so far has been in that same vein. There's not a lot of it, but when it is there, it's concerning for someone um, who is really sensitive to that sort of thing. So I would definitely say um, It's on the high end for the content severity, and so just be aware of that when you're going into it. Um, if you're concerned about those sort of things. Um, in terms of, um, I guess something as well, this is something I meant to bring up with Landman, but the violence section as well. I mean, all of his stuff's pretty realistically violent. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of it can be kind of it can be brutal at times. Um, but I would say it's definitely not gratuitous. They don't go out of their way to make it you know, a really gory, bloody ordeal. It's definitely more they're definitely more tasteful in how they do a lot of it, and it's really within the context of what's going on in the story, so it's realistic to that. But I will say when there is violence, I mean it's more on the high end because it is you're seeing people get shot, and, it's blood and bullet holes and different things like that. That's part of it. So I would say it's medium to high right now so far. Obviously, from a content perspective, it's a heavier show, and so just be aware of that going in. Like I said, a 5 out of 10 from a quality standpoint. It definitely the potential's there, but the execution I think is troubling in that first season. But I'm expecting that to improve as it goes. But yeah, that kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about here. This is a Taylor Sheridan is a talented individual, and I think that's the one thing to take away from this video is he understands how to entertain, and he understands how to do. I think probably do something on a budget because a lot of these shows there's very little CGI involved with them, and so I think he cannot just do it well, but he can do it practically on a budget. And I think that's and the shows don't look cheap, and I think that's a big credit uh, to him as a creator, and so. Um, I'm a big fan of his work in that regard. I think he does a very quality job, and I'm always excited when new projects of his come out. So, um, but like I said before, there is a lot of content problems for people who are concerned about language and sexual stuff and violence. And so, if that's not something that you want to get into, if you're worried about, letting your kids watch something, just be aware of that as well. Um, it is definitely on the heavier end. But yeah, that's all I've got to talk about today. I appreciate y'all listening in. Please support us if you want to or if you can. We would really appreciate it. And we just thank y'all for being with us today, and we will see y'all next time.